Hi, welcome to 2 of 6 in our Effective Schools Framework series. Glad you're joining us. I am Leela Talbert, and I'm actually off-site in a district today. But Robin is back at the ESC, and she is managing the chat. So if you have any questions that you would like to enter in the chat, please do so, and Robin will get you a response. But also just a heads up that we are recording this in the event that you have questions or information or something passes by and you want to rewatch or you want to share it. We'd love for you to do that too. That you are welcome to do that. That would actually make our day, because our intent is that we want this to be super useful to principals. So we're going to get started. We will be referencing the 6-pager and the exemplar packet. You do not have to have those in front of you. However, if you do, that could be helpful too, and we'll show you where those are when we get to those places. But if you missed 1 of 6 and you would like to watch it, we did record it and we will get that posted soon, and with this at the same place. So I'll send out word where those are. However, stick with me, because you do not have to know 1 of 6 in order to get something out of this. I still think it'll be useful information for you as well. So let's get rolling. Oh, let's see here. Okay. So if you're unsure what ESF is, there's also a video. It's an 8-minute video that is kind of an intro to ESF. So if this is new to you and you're just joining us in this webinar today, I would encourage you to watch that. It is linked in the SMORE newsletter that we sent from Region 15, also in the email that you received announcing this webinar. So you don't need to do that right now, but you can do it after this, because I think it does give you the broad understanding. But as we're going through this, we're really starting with the end in mind. So the end is effective instruction. Last week we did objective-driven daily lesson plans with formative assessments. This week we are going to target data-driven instruction. So that's where we're really doing a deep dive into this foundational lever. There's 6 foundational levers in ESF. And so this is our 2nd of 6, which is why the series is 6 weeks long. So when we look at effective instruction, specifically targeting data-driven instruction, one of the really fascinating things with the ESF that we love is that it really details what that looks like. So some of us were on exemplar campuses, and some of us necessarily haven't seen these in practice. And so if you haven't, it really kind of gives you a lens to look through of what does exemplar look like when I'm thinking of data-driven instruction. So when I pull up, this is page 6 of the 6-pager. Remember, we're starting with the end in mind, and I pull up the key practice. I'm going to read through each of those. So on the key practice column, that would give us what the goal of this lever is. And then when we look at the success criteria, that's really looking at our evidence, that what does our evidence say based on this goal? So for example, I'm going to look at that first row. And the key practice is campus instructional leaders review disaggregated data to track and monitor the progress of all students and provide evidence-based feedback to teachers. And so I think, okay, well, what does that look like in practice? So the evidence that I would need to show that is, do I have an assessment calendar? And if I do, does that assessment calendar include windows for data analysis? Do campus instructional leaders meet after each relevant assessment period to review data? And do I have evidence that coaching and support of teachers is informed by data? So in other words, it defines what the key practice is, but then it also tells me, which is what is so phenomenal about this, is what it would be the evidence that I have that gives to that. Because often I think we can look at a goal and think, we do that, but then what does that look like in practice? So this is, to me, what is fascinating about this system that can be so impactful for a campus that's A to F or anywhere in between, and that really you can look at it as kind of a checklist of, does my campus have evidence of those components, or do we not? So if we keep going down in the prioritized lever, we go on the 2nd row, teachers use a corrective instruction action planning process individually and in PLCs to analyze data, identify trends and student misconceptions, determine the root cause that students may not have learned the concept, and create plans to reteach. So I'm not going to read all of when we go across in the success criteria, but if you go here, I could read down and think, okay, this is a lot of words, and what does that mean? So when I go here to the success criteria, it really unpacks it, is what does that look like in action, and what would be the evidence that of our practices that would speak to this goal. Now we keep going down. Teacher teams have protected time built into the master. So what's really neat about this lever to me and the way that they built the ESF is it identifies what the goals are, but and what those success criteria are. And it talks about daily practices of what we would see or do. But absolutely, the ESF is systems-based. What are the systems in place? Does your master schedule include at least one block weekly? So these are things as instructional leaders that we have direct influence and control on. Might not be the time that we change some of those this year, might depend on urgency, if that would need to be changed right now or not. But definitely as we're planning into next year and looking at this year, this just creates a lens of what great looks like for this practice. So then I think about my PLC agendas. Are they developed using a common protocol? In other words, is there a consistent pattern in PLCs that are expected? And then do I hold teachers to those? Now I go down to the bottom one, the bottom row, student progress toward measurable goals is visible in each and every classroom and throughout the school to foster student ownership and growth. And goal setting may not have been something you've ever thought about to identify, but now as you walk down your hallways and in and out of classrooms, you can think, do I see evidence of student goals that are measurable? So if I look at the checklist, do all my classrooms include at least one visible student progress tracking artifact? And or progress track, is there evidence that speaks to that? So the intent wouldn't be that we would run out and put something up on the wall to ensure that happens. The intent would be our practices creating these systems and evidence that shows this. So as we move out of that, what I want you to remember is the target is data-driven instruction. What this success criteria or evidence kind of lens it creates for us is what would that look like? And as I'm observing and identifying my campus, is what does that look like for my campus? And is it happening? So I'm going to, one of the fabulous things for the ESF is they actually give you exemplars. So now this is what it looks like. This is what we're looking for. And so here's some examples from campuses across the state of really what speaks to that. So if that way, if you don't have anything, it gives you something to look at to see how it fits you and if it does. And if you have something, maybe something to compare. So this does a pre-work bundle for a leader for a data meeting. It's a planning sheet. This is included in your exemplar packet. So I'm kind of going to flip through these. We're not going to deep dive into each of these examples, but really just want to show you and expose you to what is in that exemplar packet if you haven't printed it. And then as we walk away from this, to know that you have access to it again. So this shows a knowledge and skills chart. This is something developed prior to going into PLCs and data meetings. They looked at example questions that aligned with the standard and then actually created what is the exemplar response. So this is exemplar practices in a campus. So what is the exemplar response that we're looking for prior to planning or prior to doing a reteach? So here's same example. So here's a different example of a question. And then these are teacher created or principal leader created exemplar responses to that. So definitely depend on the design of your campus and the capacity of who would be leading these components. But these are good examples of what the goals to work for would be. So as we're wrapping up looking at exemplars, reminder, these are in your packet that you can look at them in more detail. But this is actually a weekly data meeting agenda. This is based off of the Get Better, Faster, See It, Name It, Do It. I don't know how much you've seen or heard of that or not, but it's really based off of that pattern and planning. So this is the depth of detail planned prior to a data meeting. And if you can see here, almost scripting what is wanting to be said and what are the goals, standards to interpret. So really a very in-depth process that's established for this campus and an exemplar that's provided in your packet if you'd like to reference. So when I look at those exemplars, I always want to go back and layer on what is the success criteria. So this really would be the checklist, just like we would do for ourselves. Are all these components evident or are they not? And if not, then what do we want to do about that? So when we look at the exemplars, the last one that was listed really digs into what this data-driven instruction looks like for given feedback, for reteaching, identifying gaps, and planning a reteach. But there were not tons of examples of that in the exemplar, but this is what we're referring to as data-driven instruction, or we shorten everything to DDI in education. So if you hear DDI referenced, it's referencing data-driven instruction, which is pulled from this component right here in the success criteria. So I'm going to speak to you. This is, I most recently was an elementary principal on a campus. This is my campus, and I can speak to these systems well because I lived them. And so not to say that these are exemplars, but what I want to try to do for you is I'm just going to think through with you. If I were on that campus this year, I understand the practices that had been in practice in trying to use the success criteria, specifically speaking to 5.3 data-driven instruction for today's purposes. What were our current practices, and then we're going to layer on success criteria in the ESF and what would be our plans moving forward. So the components I pulled to share with you is really how did we tackle this work for DDI or that would fit under 5.3. And I was there more than 2 years, but really I wanted to share over a couple year periods that we really created a campus-wide calendar which spoke to that first row, and we scheduled everything we could. So as you look at this calendar that we created, really took the district calendar and overlaid what all of our campus targets were. And so what I want to show you is I kind of did a pull out a part of that calendar. So you can see on here, you just see now January to February. If you go back, I'm just going to show you this component right here and kind of do a deep dive into that to show you how we did that. And I'm not saying that this is the way to do it. I just can speak to this example and kind of show you maybe what this could look like if you don't have this already. But you can see that we had an assessment schedule. And so these are the assessments that we knew we did every year. So we started pre-planning those of when those would be. Our intent and goal in that honestly was trying to disperse the workload for students so that we weren't having all of the assessments unknowingly on the same weeks, because our intent was as we were improving at responding to the data is we wanted to try to make the data as valid as possible, but absolutely always do what's best for kids also. So you can see here, the iStation Reading Progress Monitor, well, anything in red were those windows. The Math Progress Monitor, anything in this purple color were those windows. And then now you see this strike through font. This was Circle Pre-K, TPRI for K through 3, and AIMSWeb 4 through 5 were in those same weeks. But if I think about that from my kids' perspective, those were not all the same kids that were impacted by all those assessments. So we could schedule that in the same week, but per child, they were not necessarily taking multiple or all of those tests because those varied by grade levels. Okay. So if you keep going, we actually started putting what our GT testing window was, staff meetings, staff celebrations. This up here is where the 6 weeks. And so we knew when we were going to send progress reports, we had pre-identified what those days would be. We did some grade level specific benchmarks, scheduled in safety drills. The star is we did a showtime, which really one of our campus targets based on DDI became student progress. And so essentially I would sit out by the library and students would come to me, teachers would send them, and any progress that they could show or had evidence of, we would celebrate that. And the celebration was really them telling me about it, and I would stamp their hand, and then they would go back to class. And then teachers knew they had seen me if they had a stamp. So this is just kind of a deep dive in what that calendar and what the success criteria talked about of pre-scheduling assessments. And really we tried hard, as it says here, to stick to the schedule. There were a couple of times that life happened and we had to vary a day here or there. But in a general, I would say 95+% of the time that really, if you see the dates here, it happened on those dates. So the next component of that success criteria is we really think of those PLCs. Are they aligned to campus targets? Well, we really started working on our systems around that. So when I look at a master schedule, did my teachers have opportunity, and did every teacher have opportunity for PLCs? And then what were the PLCs expectations? So we really calibrated that. I shared in the 1 of 6 webinar. So last week's webinar about some of our PLC processes based on the questions I received. I wanted to show you a little bit more of what that form looked like. So we chose to do a Google form. You can do this in multiple different formats, but I'm just going to show you some of the screenshots of what that form looked like. So again, our campus target was student progress. So our first question always was around which students are increasing. So teachers would fill this out in PLCs. So they would state their name, praise, and what in your opinion is helping this. So we wanted to think through, as adults in charge, what are we doing that's impacting the student increase, because those are the practices we want to leverage. We want to celebrate them for one, because it's hard work, but then we want to be sure we keep doing that because we don't want that to go away. Then we're going to go to what students are decreasing. We're going to state their name, concern, and then what are your next steps. So as adults in charge, what do we have control over? So there's lots of factors we don't have control over, but what do we have control over, and what are we going to commit to do to help that? So it could be a teacher table session, or it could be a parent phone call, or it could be a refer for a sit committee meeting. So it depends on the time of the year and how many times that we've actually interviewed with a student or tried different things would vary on what would be our next steps, but always thinking through what do we have control over and what are we committing to do next. So the next question in that, really, we were also focusing on standards and really aligning our lesson objective, daily lesson objective to the standards. And so we called it lesson frames, which was the we will, I can. So the we will in student-friendly language of what is the learning objective for today. And then the end of that I can is how will I know? So what can students do that will tell me if they learned or mastered that objective, and if not, what are we going? So that would inform my instruction for the next day. So really this looks different depending on if they're self-contained, departmentalized, what level you're at. Is the depth of discussion that really varied in this component. So what they submitted was very brief, and the process looked a little different depending on the setup for that grade level. However, the protocol was the same. So in other words, this was a common protocol and expectation, but it looked a little different depending on the design of the grade levels of where they were at. And then last but not least, as life still happens in schools, that's even outside of that. So most of our PLCs shared kids. And so really any other topics discussed that they wanted to make note of, because when they submit this, it also emails that person who's submitting it. Essentially they get minutes, so they get the notes. And so anything, they would put things here like Miss Green is responsible for, is going to schedule a field trip, and so is going to submit papers or make the copies for. So kind of any of the notes they're interested in will go here. And then anything that they wanted admin help with, they would list here, and then I could check this. And so I could attend PLCs, or I could check this and read this, because as they submit it, it actually goes in a screenshot that I could access. So I just wanted to go in depth a little bit on this, show you kind of what our common protocols could look like. However, to say that it could look a lot different. And so you can take on, just shared an idea. If you don't have anything, this is something that may be an idea for you. So then as we go into, you see in this year too, is really we worked on this aligned unit assessments, but we were really still growing in what does it look like for students to track their progress. And so this is actually an example from a daily, it was their bell ringer activity. And so they would color in, if they got it right, it was green. And if they got it wrong, it was red. So you could kind of start seeing trends, and they were aligned to their standards. So this is one artifact you could see if you walked in a classroom. Another one was that we actually did some goal setting. So the students set their goal based on their previous year performance, and then they would track, and this was unit assessment, so you could see where they were on target or not from their goal and prior performance. And so this was another artifact that you could see in our classrooms. So this was a picture of showtime. It really was very simple, set by the library, and students came to celebrate. One thing that I wanted to show you that one of the ways collectively as a campus, our goal became a 90-60-30 target. And so what we started doing was posting unit assessments. And so these are by grade level. So this is second grade math, and we had these for each content. So this is third grade, fourth, and fifth. And then what we would do is we would print them and sort them by performance, and then we would draw a line. So that would be the line for masters, meets, and approaches. And then we would write a total up here of where their percentages were in relation to the 90-60-30. So what percent of their students were at approaches level, meets, or masters that correlated to passing standards for that grade in previous year. So then if I layer on, so now based on those practices that I just shared with you, from our campus. Now, if I later on the success criteria and I really think through, do we have evidence of these items in the success criteria? So when I layer through this and I think we have evidence of assessment calendars, yes. Do instructional leaders meet? We did, and we had scheduled that. Do we coach and support? Yes, we had some data dig meetings. So then as I keep going through, I think, is there anything missing? So if I were going to tell you we had huge gaps in this component of what's referred to really as DDI, in this practice of teachers using a corrective instruction action planning process, did we analyze the data after unit assessments and then support our teachers in creating a reteach model and then practicing role playing and then following up and following through? We did not. So if I were going to be here this year, this would be something that I would share with leadership team and say, is this an area we want to go? Now, as I keep going down the success criteria, do our master schedules include this? We do. Do our PLC agendas include a common protocol? Yes. Now, as I keep going down, do all classrooms include at least one visible student progress? Yes. But if I looked at our hallways, we did not have evidence in the hallways of a tracking artifact. So this would be the other item as moving forward and trying to move more into the exemplar. These would be the two things from 5.3 that we would want to consider. We might consider maybe focusing on one or both. It just depends on where we are, the depth of the work, and really capacity to implement and do it well. So that's really how I would use this success criteria, lay it over our current practice and what would that look like and what would be next steps for us, which is really one of the reasons I'm so passionate about sharing this with you, because your next steps may look very different depending on where you're at, what your practices are. So you may start in a very different place, and we know that all campuses are unique. And so you can make it tailor fit you, but yet could be a tool for all of us. So one of the reasons I wanted to share in this and that I would want to focus on, I just learned this week, which was fascinating to me, focus so much in this area right here, this guy, our Texas Instructional Leadership, which is based around a lot of the work around leverage leadership, teach like a champion. But the target here is what they took is, if you look at this trend, is the percent of mastery that was happening on campuses and then comparative to performance. So essentially, free and reduced or economically disadvantaged, the higher percent, the lower performance, if you see this large cluster. So what this group really set out to do was study their target were these up here. So it's highly economically disadvantaged students, but yet their performance is phenomenal. So these are the practices, and these are where these practices came from, is what were the common practices that were happening that were getting those kinds of performance, because we all want our kids to grow and master content, no matter where they come from or where they're at, anywhere on this continuum. We want them all ideally to be performing up here. So those are the practices that we would want to replicate. So I felt like that was fascinating. Campuses across Texas did a pilot 2 years, and you can see that the data from implementing this practice right here and honing in on this and improving that, these are A to F campuses, but you can see numbers went from, there were 12 F campuses that piloted this system, and then if you see here, the next year went to 5, so then the percentage of F campuses to A rose drastically. There were only 3 B campuses the year prior, went to 12. So this is where I feel like this system can be so impactful. It's not just for F campuses or Ds, it's for any of us in the in-between. Because even if you're an A, we want to stay an A and absolutely want to see if there's anything we can even do better for kids. So really a great lens to put on, shows us an exemplar, what that could look like, and kind of help guide your next steps of what that would be. So we're going to wrap up. Just so you know, feel free to reach out to me. My contact is there, or you can even respond to the email that was sent out regarding this ESF. We'll be back next Thursday. Our target next Thursday will be high quality curriculum. And so hope to see you there. If you have any questions, again, feel free to call or email. And then hopefully you can join us back next Thursday. Thanks so much.